I saw what I saw!
I saw what I saw, but no one believes me.
Many of us dream about seeing the impossible become possible. In the case of extraterrestrial life, we may dream of the day the government gives us full disclosure. But for most of us, the best we can do is hope. Or perhaps, like millions across the globe, we can entertain our fantasies through TV and movies where we can imagine the truth coming out or playing a significant role. Now imagine being in the position to actually witness the impossible become possible, and being in a role where you can potentially validate it for all of humanity. This is Jeff Nuccetelli's story. Welcome to My First X-File.
I guess looking back, it became obvious to me very early on that there were strange things happening. And then as I went through my career, other people that I knew very well and trusted and respected professionally would come to me with similar stories from all over the world. It was always like a truth that was there that you're ignoring. And then Vandeberg really changed everything because it all came crashing in and became very, very like real in a very real way. So yeah, back in 2003, I was stationed at Vandeberg Airforce Base. So I was a security forces member, police officer in the Air Force, and at the time I was assigned to Bravo flight, so I was in a leadership position. I was responsible for up to 60 people. The war was in full swing. We were all exhausted. We'd been working nonstop for a couple of years, and I just remember being so excited and focused and interested in finding out all the details, because it was confirmation that the impossible is possible. Yeah, by this time, I've got years and years worth of all kind of strangeness and interesting cases. It was sort of like a dream come true happening in real time. Because, I've always been interested in sci-fi. I'd always dreamed of, being like a Fox Mulder on the X-Files, like getting into the FBI or the CIA and getting into a program to find out what's really going on. And I was kind of having a moment like that, like I'm finding out what's really going on, like I'm getting disclosure and verification in real time. That's what kept running through my brain. And I had the background with my family and their encounters.
Be britches anymore.
Is everything ready here on the dark side of the moon? Play the time count.
I remember my grandmother had HBO back then, and we didn't have it. We lived in the country. She watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind with me, and she was telling me that is real. My grandmother on my mother's side, she was like a truancy officer in Pittsburgh back in the early 60s or late 50s. And she had a story about UFO encounter. It was at Presque Isle, Lake Erie, 1968 or around that time period. The story was for my grandmother, her and my grandfather were out fishing in a little boat on Lake Erie. They loved to fish. They were coming in from the bay. This is on the south end of Lake Erie. Getting dark, and my grandmother and grandfather saw this craft fly in, past the lighthouse, and then land on the beach. And they were like amazed. They don't know what this thing is. It looks like a saucer. They get into the shore, By this point, it's dark. My grandfather refused to go check it out. They go back to their hotel. And in the morning, my grandmother makes my grandfather drive her to where they think it landed. And they found an area where there were depressions in the ground. And according to my grandmother, there were parts of the beach that had been turned to glass. And that was all they saw. Apparently, the police were involved. I think the FBI was involved. All the big national papers picked it up. There were multiple witnesses. Now, my grandfather has served in the Navy during World War II. He was intimately familiar with aircraft. He was in the Battle of Sicily. I have his war journal. He's talking about radio-controlled bombs, and they were attacked by bombers. And he's got experience, right? So that became like part of the UFO lore.
First encounter, Incident 1.
Yeah, well, I had a statement that I had written, and I think I had the blotter entry. This would have been from 1993 or 94, right when I joined, and I had gotten to Japan. So I finished up all my training. I got stationed in Japan, and I was the internal security guard at the 3rd Space Tracking Site in Japan.
The 3rd Space Surveillance Squadron, located at Misawa Air Base in Misawa, Japan, conducts deep space surveillance. The mission of the 3rd SSS is to detect, track, identify and catalog man-made objects orbiting Earth. Misawa Air Base is home to the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Navy. It is located on the northern part of the island of Honshu, Japan.
At that stage in your career, you're in that career field, you're in self-preservation mode. You're trying to adapt. It's a highly structured, very serious environment. On the security end of things, mistakes are just not tolerated, especially when you're young and you're trying to prove yourself and you're under like intense scrutiny. My job was just to patrol the internal fence line. It was late at night, and I had gone up to the entry control point. Me and 3 other people were standing around, talking, taking a break. And we were looking into the area, and it's this large, multi-acre area with buildings and these gigantic radome fields. A radome is a big ball with an antenna dish. They're enormous, bigger than a house. And we were looking into the radome field, just talking, and we saw this orb appear like 50 feet away, low to the ground, this blue basketball-sized light, perfectly round, and it just arced through the air, went in like a rainbow arc, and vanished right before it hit the ground. We all looked at each other, and I was like, "Did you see that?" And they're like, "Yeah, what was that, a flare?" And I'm like, "I don't think that was a flare." We had this brief conversation. We looked around, and we were all new, and we kind of freaked out because we thought they were pulling an exercise on us. And they used to do that constantly. You'd be out in your truck, and all of a sudden alarms would go off, and your supervisor would be running around in cami paint on top of your truck. "I got in your area." So, we were like, we better call it in. So I called it in over the radio and said something to the effect like, "Be advised, we saw a blue in color flare orb inside the area." And then boom, this big security response gets triggered. And now I'm like, oh my God. And I remember thinking, as soon as the words came out of my mouth and I said it might have been a flare, my brain was like, that was no flare.
Second encounter, high strangeness.
Japan, 1994 timeframe. So my wife and her friend come to my dorm room. We're hanging out. They bring a camera. They take a bunch of pictures. And then we go out for the day. We have fun, go out for the evening. A couple days later, my girlfriend, my now wife, she comes to visit me again. And she's got the pictures that they developed. She pulls them out and she's showing me and my friend Joe, because we were roommates. And in the pictures, my wife and I and Makiko, and behind us is our TV set. And on the TV set is Makiko's dead grandmother. She's in multiple pictures from multiple angles, and every time that the TV is in a frame, there's her grandma. And it was a disposable camera, and it had been brand new. They had opened it in the room. They decided to burn the pictures, so they burned them.
They burned them because of a superstition, because it was too upsetting?
Yeah, the combination of both. Sometime after, I usually had 3-day breaks. So I'd work 3 days on, 3 days off, 3 days on, 3 days off. So every 3-day break, we'd get up and we'd drive and go on an adventure to some mountain shrine or some hot spring. And we went to this shrine up in the mountains. There's all these tall pine trees. It was just beautiful. I had this very particular feeling that I was being watched. It was a comforting feeling. We go to the shrine, and she kept telling me, get up on the shrine, I'll take pictures. I remember thinking, I don't want to take pictures of the shrine. Like, no pictures here. But she took the pictures. We got them developed. In almost every picture, there are these bars of light wrapping around my body. So at first we're like, there's all kind of screw-ups. And then we get to these other pictures at the shrine, and there's me and her. We had somebody take a picture, and standing right behind me is a monk in the flesh, dressed in traditional garb of the Edo period, like from hundreds of years ago. It's not a ghostly image, like a man as if he was like photobombing. This was an empty shrine. My wife became very concerned, and then she burned those pictures too.
Third encounter. Anomalous activity or high strangeness. Vandenberg Air Force Base, 2004.
So we had some really out there, unbelievable incidents also at Vandenberg, and that was pretty widely well known. On the south end of the base, there was a public road that anybody could drive down, and it led to the beach, and it led to an Amtrak station right on the coast. So between that road, we have 2 gate shacks to control entry onto the base. It's South Gate and Solvang Gate. Each gate shack had a big multi-lane road, 3 or 4 lanes on both sides. So big concrete open area, and then woods. And you're kind of down in this valley. My one buddy was stationed at South Gate. He called over the radio and requested a patrol to come down ASAP. He needed help. So I went down there. I get to the gate shack. They had these big steel light poles that were 8 inches or 10 inches in diameter, and they were like 40 feet high, and they had, like an umbrella light on them. He tells me the one in front of the gate shack, just out of nowhere, will start moving on its own, and none of the other ones are moving. And he said, this has been going on all night. It'll stop on a dime, and then it'll start rocking. It's making all this noise, and it's freaking him out. So as he's telling me this, it starts to happen. But you're thinking rationally. There's train tracks, there's seismic activity, there's all these things. We're trying to figure it out. And as we're talking through this, 2 other light poles on different ends start to do it. But there's other light poles that aren't doing it. So some light poles in this field are there, rock, and it's actually terrifying because you're like, what is going on? Like, why is that one like an earthquake and that one's not moving at all, and they're only 15 feet apart? And that phenomenon occurred at least 5 or 6 other people that I know well, and I observed it multiple times, and we were never able to come up with an explanation for why it was happening.
Fourth encounter. Contact. Close encounter of the first kind.
April 2005. I was having a party at my house on base. The night wound down, and 2 of my very close friends were in my backyard, and we were sitting around the fire, probably 1 a.m, drinking beer. We're having this deep, deep conversation about the UFOs. What do they represent? Why are they here? And my friend Phoenix, she kept turning around and looking up in the sky. And finally, we're like, what are you looking at? And she said, do you guys see that light? And I got up and I looked. A strange light, weird bluish white light out over the ocean, up off the horizon, was pulsating in and out like a strobe, but very slow. When it pulsed out, it was like a cloud of light, and then when it pulsed back in, it looked like a solid round shape, like a glowing like marble. And it was a very, very high altitude, like a satellite. We're having a discussion. It's getting weirder and weirder. It drops in elevation, basically right over top of my house, about 250 feet in elevation. This pulsating orb, the size of a house, just floated in like something out of the Wizard of Oz. We couldn't see any structure. It would pulse, and then when the light would dim, it would disappear. But we could tell it was there. It stayed for a little bit, and then it glowed again, and then it drifted off northeast over the mountains. And we just watched it climb in altitude, and it faded away like a star. And it just vanished. We were like, what was that? I went in to the house. My wife was asleep at the time. I picked up the phone. I called the control center. I said, hey, this is Sergeant Nuccetelli. I need you guys to do me a favor. I know this sounds crazy. Call weather, call the tower, see if they've got anything on radar. I just had a large object over my house at low altitude. And they're like, dude, are you serious? Because it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm telling these guys, wake people up and find out what's going on. A little bit of time went back. They called me back. They're like, we called around. There's nothing on radar. Nothing reported. And I'm like, all right, thank you. And I told them, put this in the blotter. So I think there's a record of it. And that was it.
Vandenberg Air Force Base, October 14, 2003.
There was no dilemma as far as me worried about my reputation at that point. I wasn't worried about being ridiculed. That's because at that point I was pretty well established professionally. I was pretty well known. I was confident that no one would, try to paint me as some kind of lunatic or somebody making up stories. At this point, I didn't have any of that stress to worry about. Yeah, so I'm probably up around noon, coming off of a mid shift, so I would sleep in the morning, get ready for work, and head to work at around 5. Started like any other day. I grabbed my gear, drove to work, and when I pulled into the squadron parking lot, I noticed there was this big crowd at the smoke pit. So I was on Bravo flight relieving Delta flight. They had worked the day shift. And they all started to point at me, and they're like, oh, there's Jeff. They were excited. I parked my truck, and I head over to the smoke pit, and all at once, everybody starts to tell me that they had this real-world UFO event that happened on the base that morning at 08:45 hours. Initially, I was immediately skeptical and excited. Like, what are you guys talking about? Is this a joke? They were like, dude, believe me. Go check. This is real. This really happened. All the guys knew that, Jeff is going to love this. He's interested in UFOs. So very quickly I walked. The command center was about 100 yards away. I got into the command center, and I met with the on-duty flight chief and their senior patrolman, who I was going to relieve. So that's when I got the full initial story. So I'm getting the briefing from the two guys that actually responded out there, and the story is 3 Boeing contractors are working on Launch Facility 21 and Launch Facility 10. These are 2 launch facilities on the north end of the base. at 8:45, they called range control. It's an operations center for all the different launch pads. And these contractors reported that there was this gigantic red square floating over the launch pad, making absolutely no noise. They observed it for quite some time. The one primary witness called the other from Facility 21. He called the guys at Launch Facility 10 and on the landline and said, "Hey, are you guys seeing this? Come outside and look." And then they came out. So they saw the object from two different locations. And then they finally observed it for a while, and then they called it into their range control. I just remember being so excited and focused and interested in finding out all the details, because it was confirmation that the impossible is possible. So I went to the armory and I grabbed night vision goggles, a thermal imager, some binocs. Everybody was talking about it, so the rumor was spreading. Bravo flight came on shift. We had guard mount. Flight chief briefed the incident. You're talking 60 or 80 people oncoming that learn about this incident. And then we go on duty. We disperse all over the base. We do shift change. Now we're securing all the launch pads and all the other resources. And me and my team are out on patrol. I spent most of the day driving around looking up in the sky, hoping to see one. Sometime around the evening, I was out near the ocean looking at the sky, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of anxiety. I felt like I was being watched. And then I had a moment of clarity, and I'm like, okay, if these things show up out here, I'm alone. I have no backup, and I'm 30 minutes away from help. So I got freaked out, and I jumped back in the car, and I headed back to the command center. I get back to the command center, and two of my good friends are on the command center. One is the controller. He's the dispatcher. He's running the command center. And the other guy's one of my patrolmen, and he's just up there taking a break. Suddenly, this radio transmission comes in over the net, and it's from the security patrols out at Slick 4, which is Space Launch Facility number 4, the south end of the base. And that's one of our largest launch facility. It's designed to put up the biggest rockets we have. So they called in and they said,
"Be advised, we have a strange light over the ocean above the horizon, and it's moving erratically, acting strange."
My buddy Brandon, the dispatcher, tells him,
"Roger that. Keep a visual on it.
He alerts all of our posts and patrols.
Be on the lookout."
And then in the next few minutes, the radio transmissions start coming in more frequently. They said,
"The object is moving very strangely now. It seems to be getting closer."
And then the radio transmissions just go haywire, and people are screaming. And they're saying, the thing is coming right near us, it's coming right at us, and now it's right here. We all looked at each other, and I said, "I'm going." Everything ramped up. So I jumped in my car and I responded. As I was heading out there, my heart is pounding because I'm hearing my friends screaming over the radio that there's a UFO right over top of them, and they're screaming. And the radio transmissions just go haywire. The whole thing was an emotional roller coaster because there was an element of fear involved too. The transmissions continue to come in as I'm driving, and then I remember them saying,
"It flew off.
Eventually I got out there. I met with everybody. We had about 6 people posted there together. And the short of it is they were all hanging out at the entry control point, taking a break. That's the area where everybody has to go in and out. We controlled access to this gigantic facility. The facility's on a raised bluff above the ocean and the beach. They spotted the light. It started to come in, move strangely and erratically, and then it just zoomed in at high speed and stopped on a dime and hovered maybe a couple hundred yards from them. As it approached, the light dimmed and went out, and it turned black and opaque. So when it was near them, it was blacked out, and it looked like a matte black, either rectangle or square of enormous size. They watched it for about 45 seconds. They were all looking at each other, and then it drifted off back to the west and vanished. So separated everybody, had them write their own account, sworn written statements, and sign it under oath. And then our flight chief responded, and other people would have came out there and talked to everybody. And then we kind of were like, okay, what now? So we put it in the blotter. We made a record of it. We filed all the statements and made an incident report, and we up-channeled it to headquarters. So another incident happened a couple days later. We were on duty again. My buddy and another person were on a patrol station near the flight line. The flight line at Vandeberg, I think it's the third largest flight line in the world. It's like 5 miles long, but it's empty. There are no aircraft other than helicopters. So we had this enormous runway with no aircraft assigned, no aircraft inbound or outbound. The airfield is shut down, non-operational, and the tower is shut down. There's nobody on duty because there's nothing going on. The security patrol, again, they see a strange light over the ocean in the west. They watch it for a while. It starts to behave strangely, move erratically. They call it in. As this is unfolding, the light approaches the base, comes down in elevation, and then the light goes out, probably around 30 feet off the ground. Whatever this light was came in and either landed on the runway or hovered right over it, because they were viewing the runway from behind a tree line, and the object went below the trees. And then there was a response that I was not involved in. Allegedly, then that object just shot off, vanished. And then the people that responded to it were debriefed by Airforce Office of Special Investigation. So one of the witnesses I'm friends with that called that encounter in had a very uncomfortable interview with Air Force OSI afterward. And he was made to feel like he had seen something he shouldn't. He might have done something wrong and he might be in trouble. So directly after that meeting, he drove to my house because I was his direct supervisor. I was his boss. And he came to me and said, dude, you know the thing that happened the other night? I said, yeah. He said, they called me in, scared the shit out of me. And then after that, we kind of started being more careful about what we were calling in, who we were talking to. So to give some context, the National Missile Defense Project, it was a national project of critical importance. The government invested just insane amounts of money into this project. So Vandenberg had presidential scrutiny. So for example, some of the launches that we did, they were some of the most important launches in like 25 or 30 years. The president would be watching the launch in real time from Washington. But even without that, the resources at Vandenberg, I can't get into too many details, but there's classifications of resources, right? And at the highest level of classification are nuclear weapons and things related to nuclear security. We had resources at Vandenberg of that classification. When you're guarding resources like that, we are authorized to use deadly force to protect them. Like if somebody tries to enter one of these facilities, we're allowed to kill them, and we're expected to. After the initial investigation, where I had gone out and talked to the witnesses and got the statements, everything after that was just purely my own curiosity. What I was really doing at that point is I was investigating for me. I was just like hungry for any detail I could get. the incident had been taken seriously. It wasn't like it had been blown off and nobody believed it. Everybody believed it, and it was treated seriously and up-channeled. Behind the scenes, OSI and whoever else is going to be involved is doing their thing. They're looking at whatever data that I don't have access to, radar tracks or whatever. But I was more interested in what other people like me had seen. That's the kind of data I was after. And purely just because I was trying to figure out what's going on. What was the thing? Why was it here? Maybe somebody has one bit of information that will shed light on why this is happening. I really at that time felt that nobody knew what to do. Honestly, we ran it up the chain and it's like, what do we do? What do you do?
Stop the music, I'll have the whole thing. Those mountains, we can share the barnacles. Split the difference, I'll take the tree tops, the red rocks, we can share the molecules. The dawning of the day will be overrun by madness like the darling buds of May. Will be overcome by morning and the dawning of the day will be overrun by madness like the darling buds of May. Stop the dancing, we'll share the whole pie. The night sky, and we can share the particles. Ask the question, you'll find the whole thing. Those mountains, just listen, it'll be the dawning of the day will be overrun by madness like the darling buds of May. Will be overcome by morning and the dawning of the day will be overrun by madness like the darling buds of May.
Big thanks to Jeff Nuccetelli for sharing his story. You can find a link to Jeff's X or Twitter account at our Patreon page at tuiarts.com/Patreon. Another big thanks to Cosmo Sheldrake for the featured track Stop the Music from his EP Eye to the Ear. You can find links to Cosmo's Bandcamp page at our music page at tuiarts.com/music. All right, thanks for listening. Please share if you like the show. Stay true in the meantime, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Dragonsbread.